We're going to see how to protect public routes in Laravel. An example of a public route is when your application dynamically generates some assets like an SVG, or in this case, we're creating some embed code, right? So if I go to embed.js, this serves through my Laravel application, this little bit of JavaScript. A route like this can actually pretty easily break your Laravel site. If your customers use your embed code that's hosted out of your Laravel application and their website has some kind of viral event, they get hit by a lot of traffic, your site gets hit by that same traffic because every time someone loads a page on your customer site, your site is getting hit as well to load some embed code. So why does this break your site? There's a few things going on. Primarily, what might happen is your session storage can fill up. Now, the other thing that can happen, of course, is that your server just gets overloaded because there's so many requests going to it. And I'll talk about that in a bit also. What I want to concentrate on in this video is the session part of that. And let me show you what I mean. In our application here, we have our embed.js code. It's just in web.php, so it's just a regular route. It doesn't require authentication or anything, but it does create a session every time a user hits this route, a new user, right? So let's see that in action. Let's see why that might be an issue. In here in our application, I'll just list out the storage framework, and there should be a sessions directory. Now, by default, sessions are saved to the disk, right? And this is just the default setup for sessions. You can see I have two files here, and let's go to a private browser screen and just hit this same website, embed.js. That loaded, and now if I list out this directory, I'll have three sessions, right? Every unique user creates a new session here, and that will fill up your disk. And there's two issues with that. One, there's just disk storage. It takes up disk space every time we have a session here, especially if your session stores data in it. But two, too many files can also use up your inodes, which even if the files are tiny, you might have many files, right? And if you have too many files, you hit your inode limit and your server refuses to create new files. Now, you may also think, but I can just use Redis or something like that. But it's the same issue. With Redis, you end up using all the RAM allocated to Redis for your session storage, and then it starts evicting, if you're lucky, if that setting is set up, it starts evicting your oldest sessions, and some old sessions might get evicted, and all of a sudden your users are getting logged out. Okay, so how do we fix this? Well, let's check out what's going on in our code base. Every route on our website in the web.php file is going through some middleware. So if we check out our HTTP kernel, we'll see that some middleware is applied to every thing in the web file, right? So it encrypts cookies, it adds cookies response, it starts a session, and does some other stuff as well, right? So immediately what we might want to do is just go down here and say, without middleware, web, right? So it no longer applies the web middleware. And that should be good, right? So let's go ahead here. We can see in our old request, I'll have to refresh it. We'll see here for our embed.js file, the request originally returned cookies and all that stuff, but by removing the web middleware, it doesn't create a session any longer for people hitting the embed.js file. So that's great. We can actually do a little better though, because you might actually want some of those middleware, right? So let's go ahead and check out the middleware we're removing. You might need some of this stuff. Specifically, I like copying the API middleware, right? It'll throttle requests, which is something you might want to do, and substitute bindings, which is something you might need if your routes have bindings in them that you want substituted for, the models that they reflect. So what is the method that I like to do this? I actually like to add a whole new section of middleware here, and I'll call it public. And the public ones I like to do are these two, throttle requests and substitute bindings. I'll get rid of API here because we're not throttling requests for the API specifically. And then we can also do other stuff. Like maybe we want our embed.js to be cached, and there's actually a middleware for that. It's down here. It's called cache.headers, and it will let you set cache headers dynamically without having to do it yourself within your code. So we can do cache.headers, and we can actually set some options for those headers. So if we add a colon, and then we can say the headers to add. So the cache headers we want are going to be set to set this asset, the embed.js file, to public with a max age of a super long age. Okay, so we are in our HTTP kernel file. We've created a new middleware grouping called public. We've added 3 middleware to it. How do we apply it to this middleware, right? I guess I could just go ahead and say public here, right? And that would probably work, but I have a different way that I like to do this. And what I like to do is actually add a new route file. So let's make a new route file. I'm going to call it public. I'm going to move our route into the public one. And then we need to type into route. So our route will work, route get embed.js without middleware. I don't want any middleware stuff here because what I want to do is set anything in the public.php routes file to automatically get this web or this public middleware group applied to it. So what can we do there? Well, we can head to our providers and go to route service provider and go down here, and where Laravel by default registers the API and the web grouping, we can go ahead and create one for public. So that'll be the middleware called public, middleware group, and that'll go in the file routes public.php. Okay, let's see if we successfully did this. I'll refresh this page. Good, that's working. And go to embed.js, and we can see our response still has no cookie, right? So a session didn't get created. It's not filling up our disk space. And also we have cache control, max age. It's public. It has that long max age, so the cache header is set. There's rate limiting applied. If we actually want that, you can just remove that header if you don't, or the middleware if you don't want that, but I like it, so I added it. And the substitute bindings middleware is there if you need it as well. So this is great. We have successfully applied a specific middleware for our public routes, the public assets that our application dynamically generates. We've added some caching, we've added some rate limiting, and it does not create sessions, so our server won't die because we have too many sessions either in our Redis session store or on the disk, and it'll just, keep on chugging. Now, of course, the other thing that's a potential issue is that there are too many requests hitting your site because one of your customers, has some kind of viral thing going on, and they have a lot of traffic, and that traffic ends up being your traffic too. So there's a few things you can do. One thing might be to use Laravel Vapor. So, or, just use serverless, in other words, for your application, so that extra traffic, doesn't destroy your application because it can handle the extra load. Another thing to do that I like to do in some cases is to take a specific route in your site, like in our case, it'll be embed.js, and offload that to something else. Like sometimes I'll write a little Golang program that just responds with the stuff here that it needs to. And our Nginx configuration can then say that anytime someone goes to /embed.js, just proxy over to this Golang application instead of hitting our PHP application. And finally, the other thing you might want to do is just create a whole different site, a whole different code base, right? Like code.myapp.com, whatever your case happens to be. And that subdomain might load this using a different code base as well. So it's not hitting your web server at all, right? It's a totally separate infrastructure. And that's it. That's how you can protect your application's public routes.